just want to welcome everyone to the Safe Routes to School Coaching Action Network webinar. My name is Michelle Gully, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. This call is part of a series of webinars developed by America Walks and the National Center for Safe Routes to School. And it's part of a program that was developed to educate individuals and organizations on topics that may boost the overall success of Safe Routes to School projects across the United States. The National Center for Safe Routes to School and this program have both been made possible by funding from the Federal Highway Administration. So before we get started, I do want to just go over a few administrative details. You'll note that the agenda should be up on your screen right now. That should be what you're able to see. And we are currently going through the first portion, which is the welcome and administrative details. Along those lines, I do want everyone to note that all of the attendee phone lines are muted. We often expect a large number of participants on these calls, and this helps to avoid confusion and cut down on background noise. If you have a question during the webinar, please use the question and answer box on your computer screen, and as facilitator, I'll read the questions as they come in and respond if I am able. If you cannot access the webinar program at all, but obviously can hear me, please send me an email at mgulley@americawalks.org. That's MGULLEY@americawalks.org. And I will do my best to help you walk through the steps in order to get you online with us. Also note that the webinar is being recorded, so if for some reason we can't get you online and you can't access the program, you will have a chance to download it at a later time. Now, questions pertaining to the subject matter of the presentation may be entered at any time, but will be addressed at the end. We do try to save about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. We do ask that if you have a question about Safe Routes to School that does not pertain to today's topic, that you please submit those directly to the National Center for Safe Routes to School via their website. And their address is www.saferoutesinfo.org. And that address will be posted again at the end of the webinar in case you were unable to get that down. Now I'd like to briefly turn your attention to the agenda again. You'll see that we have already gone through our welcome and administrative details, and we're going to be diving right into our feature presentation, Making Tough Choices Easier, How to Prioritize Pedestrian Infrastructure Needs. We have a packed and wonderful list of speakers for you today. We have Nancy Pullen-Sufert starting us out. She is the Associate Director of the National Center for Safe Routes to School. Jessica Manzi, Community Projects Manager from San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, followed by David Henderson, the Bicycle Pedestrian Coordinator for the Miami-Dade Metropolitan Planning Organization, and he's going to be presenting in conjunction with Stuart Robertson, an associate from Kimley Horn and Associates Incorporated. So with that, I'm going to turn it right over to Nancy so that we can get started. Give me one moment to take care of that. Okay. Should have turned over to you, Nancy. Great.
Hey, everyone. Before I talk about the prioritization process we developed, I just want to mention the new transportation legislation. As most all of you on the call already know, Congress passed new legislation at the end of June. Unlike the previous legislation, it does not have funding specifically for Safe Routes to School. So instead, Safe Routes to School activities will be eligible to compete for funding alongside some other programs. FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, is charged with putting the legislation into practice, and there's a lot we don't know yet about how things are going to look with the new legislation. State Safe Routes to School programs are also trying to figure out what this means, and the answer is going to vary by state. People have also asked us about what it means for the National Center for Safe Routes to School, since we're the clearinghouse for the federal program. So just so all of you know, right now we've got funding through October, and FHWA is working to extend our contract through January of 2013. And we really are committed to continuing our core services, including these webinars, coordination of Walk to School Day, travel tally and parent survey processing, support to state Safe Routes to School programs and local programs, and much more of the things that you take advantage of. And I know there are a lot of questions about the new legislation, and there are some great resources that I want to point you to if you haven't already seen them. And they're up on the screen right now. One is from the Safe Routes to School National Partnership, a blog written by Margot Pedroso about what the transportation bill means for Safe Routes to School. And the other is an analysis of the transportation bill that looks more broadly about the implications for PED bike funding. That's from America Bikes. I guess the last thing that I want to say about this is that one of the things that Safe Routes to School has really working in its favor is how much it has become part of the fabric of schools and communities. And the prioritization process we're talking about today is another way that Safe Routes to School can become institutionalized into how we make decisions to improve pedestrian safety for our nation's children. So what we're talking about today really does have implications into the future as well. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about today. As all of you on the webinar know, walking to school is not always easy or safe, and often it's a lack of infrastructure that's to blame. At the same time, there are some funds to address some, but not nearly all of the shortcomings, so that our challenge is to make the best use of limited resources. So today's webinar really is about that. It's about prioritizing pedestrian infrastructure needs when several schools must be considered at the same time. So whether it's looking across a city or a school district, many communities are faced with making decisions about which locations should be addressed first and justifying those decisions as well. So as the National Center for Safe Routes to School, we wanted to be able to provide a process for transportation professionals to use that recognized that addressing safety for pedestrians should be the first priority. We interviewed transportation professionals across the country, and we asked them what they thought would help. We heard things about the need for a process that would be transparent and explainable to the public, and that was practical from the perspectives of time and data availability. With the help of transportation engineers Mike Sinecki, who was with City of Phoenix at the time, and Kevin Chang with King County in Washington State, we pilot tested and refined a prioritization process. To help spread the word, we also published an article in ITE Journal, and that's actually how some folks on the presentation today learned about the process. So to give you a little more background before you hear specifically from the experience in the city of San Francisco and in Miami-Dade County about how they use this, I want to just give you a brief overview of what the process looks like. And basically there are two steps to identifying infrastructure improvement needs. First, it's about prioritizing the schools, and second, it's about conducting field reviews of the highest priority locations. So when this process is used, what you get are pedestrian infrastructure needs for your schools that have the greatest safety concerns. So schools are placed into one of 5 groups based on crash history, safety concerns that might have been identified by parents or the school administration or public, and then information about current pedestrian use or what the forecast is for potential pedestrian use if conditions were improved. So these 5 groups look like this, with group 1 for schools that have students who need to walk to school and the conditions aren't safe. The spectrum goes to group 5, which is our best case scenario where we have kids walking and there's infrastructure to support it. So as you can see, group 1 schools are the ones that most urgently need improvements. So we also knew that many communities would end up with a lot of group 1 and group 2 schools, and that we needed some additional criteria to be able to help refine within those groups. So again, we looked to factors that influence safety and developed recommendations to look specifically at traffic volume and speed in surrounding streets, to examine crossings, and then look at existing pedestrian infrastructure. So there are some other realities that come into play when prioritizing, such as geographic distribution of project locations and whether the needs of low-income communities have been properly considered. There's also this less tangible piece, but as many of you on the call know, the vital role of school and community interest and whether there's readiness and buy-in. We created a 2-page worksheet to help users capture and organize the information about each of the schools as they were using the process. So just to circle back again, using this process thus far winnows down the list of schools that then merit moving on to step 2, where you're conducting a field review of a specific number of schools that have the most urgent safety-related needs. So at that point, we created an adapted version of FHWA's pedestrian road safety audit with a list of questions for users. And when we conducted interviews with engineers, they told us that they really needed a list of questions to jog their memory versus a lengthy measurement-based tool. But some places might prefer using something like that. So we also have a resource to guide you towards some of the seminal audits that are out there. And a lot of audits that you see are built off of audits that already existed. So you'll see that this is a condensed version. If you go to our website and search for Assessing Walking and Bicycling Routes, a selection of tools, that's the title on that right-hand side piece, then you'll get a list of specific audits. On the left, you see an excerpt out of the document that we're talking about today, which was based off of the pedestrian road safety audit and gives you a list of questions to think about. So after the field review phase, you've got a good idea of what improvements most need to be made and where. So that's the process in a nutshell. I don't want you to interpret my brevity as a lack of appreciation for how hard this stuff is, and luckily we've got Jessica, David, and Stuart to give us the insider perspective on how they put some of these things into practice. If you would like to take a look at the document that we put together on this, you can search our website, saferoutesinfo.org, and search for Prioritizing Infrastructure Improvements. Or you can search for the title that you see here, Safety-Based Prioritization of Schools. Either one will get you there. And here's my contact information. And on that note, I want to turn it over to Jessica Manzi, who's formerly of San Francisco MTA and now with the City of Redwood City, California, who's going to tell you more about how San Francisco did it and who was involved and what kind of results they got.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. My name is Jessica Manzi. I'm a transportation planner and engineer for the City of Redwood City in the San Francisco Bay Area. But today I'm going to be talking to you about a project I was involved with when I was working at the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. While I was at the SFMTA, I was working in the Livable Streets subdivision, leading a team of planners and engineers to design and build bike, pedestrian, and traffic calming projects. During my presentation, I'm going to give you some background on San Francisco and Safe Routes to Schools work there, the school assignment policy that the district uses and how that translated into a commute study that gave us all the data that we needed to do a prioritization system, and then what our infrastructure prioritization system looks like, and then how we also used it to prioritize non-infrastructure projects. And I'll finish up with some lessons learned. First, I'll give you some background on San Francisco to help you put it in context relative to where you are. San Francisco is a 49-square-mile city on the tip of a peninsula with over 800,000 residents. It's a single city and county, and it only has one public school district with over 100 schools, or with 100 schools that serve students from elementary through high school. So San Francisco has had a school area safety program for over 10 years. This is the group that takes the lead on all school-related traffic and transportation issues, including safe routes to schools. Before we had a more data-driven prioritization system, we maintained a list of potential grant applications that was populated with requests from schools, parents, and residents, as well as projects that came from traffic calming plans or other planning efforts, as well as staff-identified needs. The system worked pretty well. We were able to tackle a lot of the low-hanging fruit, but we really got to the point where it was like, which school's next? What do we do next? So a more data-driven approach was really appropriate for us. So with the first round of federal Safe Routes to Schools projects, San Francisco got a non-infrastructure grant, and that was our opportunity to really formalize the existing relationships we had into a real coalition in San Francisco. Safe Routes to Schools San Francisco is led by the Department of Public Health with partners that represent engineering, enforcement, the schools, as well as community partners who deliver programming within the schools. So until recently, San Francisco Unified School District used a diversity index to assign students to schools. So we didn't have neighborhood schools. Just to give you a sense, these are two pictures of where students live relative to their school. Up here in West Portal, you can see that you have the students pretty well dispersed through a large area and all over the city. In the bottom left, we have the Tenderloin Elementary School, where you have a real pocket of students living close to the school, as well as students that live farther away. So we don't have, or at least at that point, we really didn't have a consistent approach or understanding of how far students lived from their schools. The district revisited this policy and realized that it wasn't effectively desegregating the schools or improving educational outcomes, and so they changed their policy at the end of 2011 to add home location as one of the factors for assigning children to school. Outside of the school district, we saw this as a real opportunity to understand travel behavior going to and from school, and so San Francisco partnered with the researchers at UCSF to evaluate the school commute for students at all of our schools, but focused on students in kindergarten, 5th, 6th, and 9th grades. And this, we were able to get almost all of the schools participating in this effort. So at the end of the day, we got a huge amount of data that we could use to develop a prioritization system. When the next call for projects for Safe Routes to Schools projects came out, I'd seen the article that Nancy and her collaborators had published in the ITE journal and used that as a jumping off point for developing our own prioritization system. And we used the results from the UCSF commute study as well as crash data we had from our department and demographic data from the school district. And then we really tailored the procedures outlined in the article to fit our needs, both to prioritize infrastructure and non-infrastructure projects. So like I said, we ended up with two separate prioritization systems that spoke to the different goals we had for infrastructure and non-infrastructure projects. For our infrastructure improvements, our goal was to prioritize schools with a lot of kids walking and safety concerns. And for our non-infrastructure projects, we wanted to prioritize schools with the highest potential for more walkers. And these goals tend to be tailored to the evaluation criteria used for some of the major funding opportunities we have in San Francisco, whether it's through the state and federal programs or more local and regional funding opportunities. Now I'll walk you through the prioritization system that we used for infrastructure projects. And again, our goal here is to prioritize the schools with a lot of kids walking and safety concerns. So our first step was really to pull all of the data together in a single spreadsheet. We got our total school enrollment information from the school district. We were able to get the percent who walked to school from the UCSF study. And using those two pieces of data, we could calculate the total number of walkers now. And then we also used the pulled pedestrian-involved crashes from our own collision database. And this gives you a little screenshot of what our spreadsheet looked like. Here I'm highlighting the Tenderloin School, which is one of our Tier 1 schools that had 367 students, 49% walking, which gave us 181 walkers, and there were almost 100 pedestrian-involved collisions at the school, or around the school. And then the next step was to classify these schools into 5 tiers. And to do that, we calculated quartiles for the total number of walkers and pedestrian collisions, and then classified each school to come up with a number that could then be ranked. And I'll show you a screenshot of what that looked like, again, looking at Tenderloin School, each school, in this case, Tenderloin was given a 4 because it had the highest, it fell into the group with the highest number of walkers, and it also fell into the highest number of pedestrian collisions, so it also got a 4. We just added those up and got a score of 8, and all of the schools that had a score of 8 ended up being in Tier 1. But that's the process that we followed for all of the schools, again, just using Excel and embedded formulas. And then the next step was really to do a reality check. We wanted to go back and look at whether the breakdown made sense. This graphic shows you, all of the schools highlighted in red are those schools that we've already completed Safe Routes to Schools grants for or have funding to do. So you can sort of see that they're spread out everywhere. But for the most part, they are in the schools that we've already done are in the top tier. And most of the schools that we see in Tier 1 and Tier 2 are those that are really in our more urban core, surrounded by multi-lane arterials and higher traffic volumes, and typically denser neighborhoods. So for the most part, we were pretty satisfied with how the schools ended up being ranked. And then the next step, we actually went a little bit further to rank the schools within the tiers using data that we had. We had the percent of students living within a mile, and then proxies for low-income schools, which is the percent qualifying for low and free and reduced price lunches. And then we wanted to, again, prioritize schools where we saw more severe safety concerns. And where's my mouse, and show you what this looked like. Again, for Tenderloin, again, here's the data, turned each of these data points into a quartile score and summed it up to give a score of 12. So within each tier, the schools were ranked with these data. But at the end of the day, what we found is when we went to the next step of figuring out which schools we were really prepared to submit grant applications for, that was more of a driver than where the school fell within its tier ranking. So at that point, we looked at schools where we already had work planned or completed, obviously didn't want to duplicate work. If there were coordination opportunities, in some cases there were existing planning efforts going on. We didn't want to sort of put the cart before the horse in submitting a grant application when we hadn't completed our planning process. We also looked at what the potential scope would be versus the grant budget. Wanted to make sure there was a logical relationship between the size of the budget and what grant source we were looking at. For example, for federal Safe Routes to Schools grants, we don't really like to apply for those grants unless we have a big project. So if we had a school with a total budget of $100,000, we probably weren't going to apply for federal funding for that, whereas if we had one that was $750,000, it was a better match for federal funding. And then also there are some types of projects that lend themselves to federal funding and others that don't. So again, those are the things that we looked at when we were actually selecting the school for a specific grant cycle. In this case, the first school that we applied for was the Tenderloin Community School, which I highlighted. So again, that was ranked 7 out of the Tier 1 schools, but it was the right school at the right time given other projects that were going on in the area. There's paving that was planned on some of the adjacent streets, so it would be a good opportunity to partner with that work to get the improvements done at the same time. And this grant, we applied for this grant and it was funded. So now I'll talk a little bit about how we applied a similar process for our non-infrastructure schools. And here we are, again, looking to prioritize schools with the highest with the highest potential for more walkers. And again, the first step was to compile the data in a spreadsheet with the school enrollment from the district, and then we calculated the percent living within a mile. And again, this was tied to where the students live, as well as an Excel plugin that would calculate that information for us, which is really handy. And then the percent that walked to school from the commute study. And with that, we were able to calculate the number of non-walkers. And here, this is simply what it looked like, all of the schools with the numbers, and we just ranked all of the schools by the number of non-walkers and then split it into 5 groups. And then the last step, obviously, especially for non-infrastructure projects, was really to solicit participation. It doesn't matter so much if you're in a top tier if the school's not interested in participating in the program. So that was a critical piece of selecting schools to continue working with. Now I'd like to highlight some of the lessons that we learned from this process. And the first one is really to focus on the goal. We ended up with different procedures depending on the type of project that we were looking for, and also it was tied to the grant funding sources in some regards and how they evaluated grant applications. Use what you have. We were very fortunate to have all this data from the UCSF commute survey, and we really felt like we were able to leverage that. But if you don't have all that data, you can come up with a lot of sort of stand-ins for that data. You know, whether it's, if you don't have the crash data, you can simply look at traffic volumes or the number of lanes of traffic and speed limits, and those are pretty good proxies for safety concerns. And in the case of number of walkers, if you don't have counts, we surveyed sample classrooms, but if you can't get inside the classrooms, you can always do counts outside the schools. There's a lot of ways to get that data that you may want to prioritize schools. And then relationships are also really key. The prioritization system for us, it was really pretty easy for us to roll it out because we had some of my staff engineers that were able to help pull together the collision data. We had the researchers from UCSF that populated the information from the commute study. So pulling those resources together enabled us to do the prioritization system pretty quickly. And then take advantage of time-sensitive opportunities. The fact that the school assignment procedure changed was San Francisco's opportunity to get a research institution involved, but maybe you're in a community where busing is going to be ended, or some schools are being closed or schools are being opened. Those all provide opportunities for studying travel behavior, and you might be able to pull in resources from neighboring educational institutions to help you with those. And finally, be creative with funding. The school commute study cost $15,000. We were having a hard time finding a single grant for $15,000 on short order. But when we split it up into 3 pots of $5,000, it was really easy to get that money. $5,000 tends to fall under the threshold that required lots of approval. So we had 3 different sources that were able to contribute that quickly, and we were able to turn this into a real data collection effort quickly, which is what we needed because the school assignment policy was changing so soon. And I think for my final takeaway message, I'll say, although that we applied a very data-intensive methodology, you can get equally useful results with a very simple system, and it really helps to have a data-driven approach that you can just rely on every time a funding opportunity comes out there. Here's my contact information, as well as contact information for Anna Volidzik, who manages the Safe Routes to Schools program in San Francisco, as well as Ellen Robinson, who's current staff at San Francisco MTA, who would be happy to provide information about any ongoing San Francisco issues or questions. And with that, I will hand it over to David and Stuart.
Thank you, Jessica. This is David Henderson. I'm with the Miami-Dade MPO. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Miami-Dade County is down at the southeast end of the Florida Peninsula. It's a population of 2.5 million. It's the 8th largest county in the United States, and with a single school district, Miami-Dade County Public Schools has 415 schools overall and 380,000 students. Miami-Dade County includes substantial urban, suburban, and even rural contexts. And so we're dealing with a large variety of situations when it comes to transportation in general and school transportation in particular. Our Safe Routes to School program is been oversawn by the school board community traffic safety team. The community traffic safety team is a program of the Florida Department of Transportation where they help organize groups of multidisciplinary groups, including law enforcement, traffic engineering, citizens, the business community, all around a particular type of traffic safety concern. Most of them are organized around municipalities. They're organized geographically. The school board CTST is unique because it spans the entire county and just deals with traffic issues around schools. The CTST includes Miami-Dade County Public Schools facility staff, police, transportation departments, the Florida DOT, the County Public Works, the MPO, and there are representatives from the Crossing Guard program, education, and injury prevention programs. That was the group that was most logical to help oversee and coordinate a countywide Safe Routes program because all of the disciplines were present and they had that countywide perspective. In the early days of the Safe Routes program, we used traffic crash data that had been created through a prior pedestrian safety project to help guide the selection of schools. This is a map that shows, it's a pin map of juvenile pedestrian crashes, traffic crashes, that's overlaid by a density mapping program to show where the real hotspot areas are. And so since we had access to this data already, it seemed like a good guide to use to begin the identification of critical schools. And so this is a map of Dade County that shows the location of the dots represent all of the elementary schools in Miami-Dade County, and then the different color codes represent the status of various Safe Routes projects. The red dots are the first ones that were the first schools that were selected and prioritized, and then the others going through the process from construction, projects that have been funded, and then the ones that have been studied but not yet funded. And they follow pretty closely with the crash data that was studied previously, but we knew moving forward that we wanted to try and look at more factors in more detail, because I think we were running up against a limit of what the crash data was going to be able to show us. And so when the National Centers process became available, we realized this was a good opportunity to take advantage of that and move forward with the next round of school prioritization and selection of elementaries. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Stuart Robertson. He'll introduce himself and go into the details of our prioritization process and the Safe Routes application.
Thank you very much, David. My name is Stuart Robertson. I'm with the engineering and planning consultant firm of Kimley Horn and Associates. Kimley Horn served as the Miami-Dade MPO's consultant on this project, and the MPO initiated the Safe Routes to School Plans 2011 with three clear objectives illustrated on this slide. First, to develop a formal method to prioritize elementary and K-8 schools for SRTS infrastructure improvements. First goal is the prioritization process that established how the priority schools were determined, and will therefore be the focus of this presentation, but I will spend a little bit of time toward the end of the presentation on the second and third goals. The second one was to develop the SRTS plans and infrastructure improvements for those 10 priority schools that were selected during the first step. And then thirdly, to prepare the infrastructure funding applications and submit those applications to the Florida DOT. Prior to 2011, SRTS funding has been secured or applied for a total of 62 elementary and K through 8 schools in Miami-Dade County out of the total of 219 elementary public schools. As such, the remaining 157 elementary or K through 8 schools were evaluated in this prioritization process with the goal of selecting 10 schools to prepare applications for. As you will see, the process established to rank the schools is need-based. The prioritization factors were developed through careful research and coordination, and one of the key inputs from the national literature was the priority grouping methodology recommended by the National Center for Safe Routes to School and illustrated in the ITE Journal article from February of 2010. In addition, the prioritization factors were carefully considered and refined by the Project Study Advisory Committee, which was the School Board Community Traffic Safety Team, or CTST for short, that David discussed. The 6 prioritization criteria are, first is the percentage of students walking to school, which comes from a robust annual survey conducted by the public school district, which we had access to with data analysis and support from the University of Miami's Walk Safe program. So we had a real good understanding on a system-wide level of the percentage of students walking to school for each school. The second criteria is the number of students living within 1/2 mile of the attended school, and these data were available from the school district's GIS database. Thirdly was juvenile pedestrian crash data, which is considered representative of the safety challenges experienced by the student pedestrians. 5 years of crash data from 2005 through 2009 were analyzed. Fourth is the total number of pedestrian and bicycle crashes in the database. Was also evaluated as indicative of a general representation of unsafe walking conditions, inadequate infrastructure, and perhaps even as affecting parents' perceptions of whether to allow their child to walk to school. Fifth was traffic volume on the nearest major street. We collected and analyzed as an evaluation factor for the crossing factors of those major streets. And then finally is automobile ownership levels. We evaluated automobile ownership since low household automobile ownership may indicate a propensity for walking to school. Based on the input received from CTST, it was determined that some factors should be given different weight than others. The percentage of students walking to school was assumed to be the most influential factor to determine need, and therefore was assigned a weight factor of 2. On the other hand, automobile ownership, which can be thought of as our proxy for income level, was determined the least influential for reasons having primarily to do with the availability of the data. It was only readily available at the traffic analysis zone level, or TAZ, and hence we assigned it a factor of 1/2. An ordinal ranking system was developed for each factor, 1 through 157 for each of the schools evaluated. And a school's final prioritization score is the composite rank of the individual factors and weightings. Therefore, the better the composite ranking, the greater the need for SRTS improvements at the school. And as an example, I've included these excerpts from our prioritization database. On the top here is an excerpt just showing the various schools. They all have school IDs assigned to them by the school board district. And I'll use the Feinberg-Fisher K-8 Center as an example. This school is located in the South Beach neighborhood of Miami Beach, which is the densest area with the most bicycling and walking activity in Miami-Dade County. So for this particular school, for example, there were 277 bicyclist and pedestrian crashes in the 5 years of the database, which resulted in a total crash ranking of number 1. 277 was the most number of crashes within the database. With that number 1 ranking for this particular criteria, and when combining it with the rankings that this school received from the other 5 criteria, we ended up with an average ranking of 23.7. So all 157 schools were calculated for their average ranking, and then those were essentially just ordered numerically with the lowest score being the best. Feinberg-Fisher happened to be tied for 3rd in this methodology. So that's an example of how we arrived at the composite rankings. The rankings are significant in that this is the first county-wide SRTS prioritization ranking undertaken for Miami-Dade schools. And the criteria consisted of quantitative factors rather than qualitative factors because a numerical ranking was desired. Qualitative factors such as student, parent concerns were not available in a concise and consistent format for every single school, although qualitative factors were evaluated for the high-ranking schools, as I'll discuss in a moment. And, of course, a basic assumption with the methodology is that these 6 factors have a direct correlation with the school's potential for benefits. As with any good planning effort, we try to think about what some of the potential drawbacks to the methodology are. One item of note is that the prioritization scheme does not include existing pedestrian infrastructure levels near the schools. However, we recognize that this drawback existed, and we mitigated for it by conducting field reviews of the high-ranking schools to assess walking networks and infrastructure in the vicinity of these schools, and to potentially eliminate these schools from consideration if they had very few apparent infrastructure needs. These schools you can basically think of as the ideal scenario or Group 5 schools from the National Center's methodology, and as ideal scenario schools, we did not consider them for infrastructure applications at this time. The other 2 potential drawbacks that we identified are addressed through the identification of possible future modifications to the methodology. One is to consider obtaining input from principals on the relative need for SRTS improvements at their school as part of the annual survey that I discussed previously. And secondly, based on some data concerns about automobile ownership, there was strong potential to replace the automobile ownership criteria with percentage of students eligible for a free or reduced lunch, and use that as a proxy for income level, and to incorporate another school-based data input which the school district already has readily available and is comfortable with using. And so to make our final selection of the top 10 priority schools for SRTS infrastructure applications, we started with the quantitative priority rankings as our guide. So these were the raw rankings. We removed magnet schools based on a CTST request, since the magnet schools do not follow traditional boundaries and a far lower percentage of the student body lives within walking distance. And we also removed those ideal scenario schools with few apparent infrastructure needs. And what remained was our list of the top 10 priority schools. As you can see, the top 10 schools generally follow the priority rankings, and in fact, 7 of the top 12 schools from the raw rankings were selected for applications, and no school outside of the top 25% of schools in the raw rankings was selected. The large light green circles on this map are the locations of the 10 priority schools selected from this methodology relative to the previously studied and funded schools. You can see geographic pattern of the schools and that they tend to be located in certain clusters, and these are clusters that are characterized by being in neighborhoods where the context is such that you find better walking conditions, more traditional grid street networks, and walking is just generally more palatable in these areas. The west central area of Miami-Dade tends to have been developed more recently and is much more suburban in character and with generally higher income levels as well, and those schools tended to not be ranked as highly within this need-based approach. The SRTS plan development and applications followed the traditional approach. I want to emphasize the high degree of coordination with local school representatives that we undertook to prepare the plans, including input from principals, parents, teachers, and students. Our site assessments identified many common elements on neighborhood streets surrounding the schools, including the lack of crosswalks in some locations at intersections right outside of schools or very near schools, the lack of sidewalks, sometimes even when crosswalks are provided, and deficient or confusing signage, such as the photo in the lower right-hand corner, which depicts a school crossing warning sign on a 6-lane arterial without any apparent crossing in and of itself, certainly a location that could use some additional improvements to the crossing other than just the provision of a sign. Our recommended improvements ranged from standard signage and sidewalks up through more innovative pedestrian crossing treatments, such as the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, or the RRFBs, illustrated in the photo in the lower right of this slide. These flashing beacons have been issued official interim approval by the Federal Highway Administration as a traffic control device. And in order to be able to get support for all of these improvements, we coordinated with the local Public Works Department. And the degree of coordination with Public Works is also very important. We achieved the buy-in of Public Works early by collaborating with their schools coordinator during both the ranking process and also in the development of these infrastructure recommendations. In addition to the infrastructure applications, we developed safe routes maps for each of the priority schools, essentially showing the walking routes that have been reviewed and that include the proposed infrastructure improvements to enhance walking conditions along the routes. The maps also include photos that are illustrative of the typical conditions found along the route, which are being addressed by the recommended improvements. And the light green area on the map, in this case, is the attendance boundary. The darker green circle inside the light green area, or in this case a partial circle, is the half-mile radius around the school, which essentially served as the study area for our data collection. You can see that in many cases in dense neighborhoods, the half-mile radius extends all the way out to the school boundaries in some cases. And with the robust GIS analysis and database available from the school district, we were able to account for these school districts when calculating some of our criteria, such as the number of children that lived within the half-mile walking area or the 2-mile walking radius. In closing, this countywide prioritization process and the resulting SRTS
This is Chris Niehoff from Key Markets. We're at 36.
Have been made possible without the close coordination and help from many different stakeholders, including school staff, students, parents, and principals of the priority schools, as well as the Miami-Dade MPO, who was the overall sponsor of the project. And David and I would like to thank the National Center for this opportunity to present the project. And for all the participants on the call, we hope that it will be of help in developing your Safe Routes to School plans. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much to David and Stuart and Nancy and Jessica. That was a wonderful presentation. Now we'll spend about the next 12 minutes taking some questions. So if you haven't already submitted your question, please feel free to do so at this time. So give me just one moment. I will put up the speaker's contact information so folks can take that down while we're handling our questions. There we go. Okay, so we'll dive right into the questions. And first, let me just do a quick audio check. We'll make sure we still have everybody on the line with us. Nancy, Jessica, David, and Stuart, you still all there?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. And I always want to check to make sure the technology is working with us. Okay, so Stuart, this question came in while you were speaking, but I believe it's one that David and Jessica, Nancy, you may also have input in it as well. So feel free to jump in if you have something to add. The question was, how do you break ties for scores when you're doing school priority rankings? If you have a lot that come up very closely together.
Maybe I'll take a first crack at this. We didn't focus so much on, we use the prioritization system to develop the top priority schools, but then we really focused on what's the scope of the project and how does it best match the funding opportunities. So we didn't really find ourselves in a situation where there's two schools that were so perfectly aligned. Once you get down to the detail of what's the scope of the project and what timing makes the most sense, those issues were sorted out.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry, we were having phone problems. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure, yeah. I thought I heard a hang-up noise. I got a little nervous there for a second. But it's good to hear you on with us. The question was just how do you break a tie if you have scores that are very similar for schools when you're doing priority rankings?
The tie essentially, in some cases, were broken by the field reviews. And we did conduct the field reviews to identify the ideal scenario schools, or those Group 5 schools. And in the case of the example that I showed in the presentation, the Feinberg-Fisher School, it was considered to be one of those ideal scenario schools because it had a robust network around the school and was not considered for an application. So that's one potential way when you have the need-based approach that we used is to maybe break that tie by looking and seeing which school has more either infrastructure needs or perhaps institutional needs in the case of a non-infrastructure application.
Sure. Okay. Anyone else want to add anything, or should we move on to the next question? Okay, sounds like we'll move on. So actually, this question came in for you, David, and a couple of folks are just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the Community Traffic Safety Team.
Oh, sure. That's, like I said, it's a program of the Florida DOT. They have a staff person that's assigned to work with local groups, primarily police departments, I think, but the school board, CTST, is an exception. And he facilitates meetings among relevant, interested parties, including the groups that I described, traffic engineering, enforcement, education, other just simply, interested parties. I think a lot of the one thing that characterizes the CTS teams is that they are all unique because it's a process that allows the context of the traffic safety program to be accounted for. So if there's a university in that area, the university participates. If there are more kids issues or more issues related to elderly pedestrians, they're taken into account for. It's all volunteer, but ultimately the DOT is able to provide at least some level of support and resources when it comes to trying to get the issues in those areas addressed.
Great. Thank you. Excuse me. And Stuart, this question came in while you were speaking. This person wants to know, why use a half-mile radius when students are normally not eligible for school bus transportation up to 2 miles from the school site?
It was done because the half-mile radius represented the area where we would find the greatest density of walking conditions. And like I said, in many of our urban area schools, 2 miles would be well beyond the boundary of the school itself and would not have any walking conditions that would be associated with the school. But there is no hard and fast rule that really should be a decision regarding the area within which the data is collected should be based on context.
Sure. Okay, let's see. This is another question that came in while you were speaking, Stuart, since I already have you on the hook here. This person is commenting that the walking maps are way cool. So who exactly made them? Was it grant supported, and how much time did it take?
Yes, the maps were made by Kimley Horn as part of the MPO's project. So it was supported by the MPO funding for the Safe Routes to School plans.
Okay. And let's see here. Jessica, these questions actually came in while you were speaking. In regards to your data sheet, someone was just wondering how many years' worth of collisions did you have in the data sheet?
So the collision data was over a 5-year period, and the radius that we used for those was a quarter mile. And in our case, because San Francisco is such a relatively small area, if your radius is too big, you end up with the circles around the schools overlapping with each other. So we tried to make them a little bit smaller just to be able to differentiate the schools from one another.
Okay. And who did you work with at the school district?
So in San Francisco, if I'm going to get his title right, they have a director for sustainability, and so that was our primary liaison with the school district, but definitely at this district level. Before his position was created, we worked with a variety of different folks, but for this project, it was the director of sustainability.
Okay, great. And the last question I have here that came in while you were speaking was, is a copy of the UCSF computer study available for download?
Ooh, good question. I'd have to check with Anna and UCSF to see if that's anywhere. There's definitely a lot more data out there. I just am not sure what form it's in, but I can follow up and give you that information, Michelle.
Okay, great. And whoever asked that question, if you want to follow up on that, just please feel free to email me, and then after I'm in contact with Jessica about that, I can forward you any information. Or you can also just email Jessica directly, as her email is up on the screen as well. So that is all the questions that I do have for you folks. We actually finished up just a couple minutes early. Y'all did such a good job covering your subjects that we've tired the folks out for questions. So I want to thank everybody again for doing a wonderful presentation this afternoon. I'll put up our final slide here just to give everyone a little bit more information. Our next webinar is actually going to be on July 30th, and it is the Safe Routes to School Middle School Curriculum, Why It Is Important and How to Make an Impact. If you'd like to register for that program, you can do so either at the National Center for Safe Routes to School website, which is right there. It's www.saferoutesinfo.org, or at the America Walks website, www.americawalks.org. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully we will have you all online with us again in 2 weeks. So thanks again, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Bye.